Hello, welcome to episode 221 of the CRICKETher Weekly. We are here in beautiful Worcester for Sparks v Vipers in the latter stages of the Charlotte Edwards Cup. Now Sid, we know who the four finalists are now, who are going to be appearing at finals day next weekend, and obviously two of them are the Sparks and the Vipers, who we're about to see today. Who are the other two?
Yeah, so the Blaze and the Stars are the other two that have already qualified. So that's all tied up now in terms of who's actually going to be there at finals day in Derby next weekend. What we don't know is who's going to be playing who in the semi-finals yet. So it's still pretty much up for grabs as we stand. It'll be first place against fourth place. So Blaze could come first, they're in pole position, but Stars could pit them to that. And any of the two other teams could also end up coming fourth and playing whoever wins. So still lots to play for in terms of those positions in the actual table.
Fantastic. Now over to women's cricket news this week. There's been some more developments in terms of signings, both from a playing perspective, also intriguingly this week from a coaching perspective. Let's start with Surrey, who have announced a whole raft more signings, so 6 more signings since we were last on air. Kirstie Chatley, Tilly Courtine-Coleman, Danny Gregory, Ailish Cranston, Phoebe Franklin and Rhiannon McDonald-Gay have all signed for Surrey, playing for Surrey next year, so they're up to a total of 10 signings. They've almost got their full complement of players. What do all of those players have in common? Well, they're all existing Stars players. So it really is, as we were saying last week, a case of the Stars seamlessly morphing into Surrey. But there is an interesting question, isn't there, Sid, about whether they're going to sign anyone who isn't a current Stars player.
Yeah, I mean, they've got the core of a side here, so it's interesting, what other roles, they're going to be able to persuade people to come in on. Obviously, if you're, from one of the less successful sides, Stars definitely a team you'd want to join, but you obviously also, you want to join and to ensure that you're going to play. So they've got the core of their team, and they've signed up the big names, ADR and Bryony Smith and Alexa Stonehouse and Rhiannon McDonald-Gay and the younger players. They've got a decent core now of older players. The one thing they're still missing, potentially, are they going to sign a wicketkeeper? So intriguingly, we saw Rihanna Southby, who's currently the Vipers wicketkeeper. We saw her turn up to play for Surrey in the London Cup this week, which we'll come back to later. Is she going to be going back to Surrey? She's someone that grew up in the Surrey system. She obviously, feels proud of that association of being a Surrey player. Is she going to be coming back and playing for Surrey next year? That's going to be one that we will be interested to find out.
Yeah, absolutely. They have signed Kirstie Chatley, so they do have a wicketkeeper. But yeah, seeing Rihanna Southby playing in that random midweek London Cup game for Surrey, obviously she would have had to negotiate that with the Vipers, but we did just think it might have given us a little bit of a hint maybe about her intentions for the coming season next year. And I guess at the moment, as far as we're aware, we think that the teams are still in a period whereby they get first dibs on their existing players. It will then move to a much more open market a little bit later in the season. We don't know exactly when, but that's why all the signings that we're hearing at the moment are of people signing for their existing side, essentially, or what their existing side will become. However, we have news of a coaching signing. The first official head coach signing this week was announced, and Durham have announced that Dani Hazell is going to coach them next year. Intriguing piece of news, isn't it, Sid?
Well, yeah, I mean, we know that when you spoke to the Durham CEO, right after the Durham were announced as being one of the Tier 1 hosts, he said, oh yeah, and we've got Dani Hazell's going to come on board. Dani Hazell apparently was unhappy about that, because she was like, well, I said no such thing, I haven't made them any promises. So, now she has signed on the line. I wonder what could have persuaded her, Raf.
Well, we obviously don't know. We don't know what's happened behind the scenes. My assumption would be that the package that Durham's offering her would have had to be quite good, because you would think that there would be serious competition from Yorkshire. And actually, when we spoke to her a few weeks ago during the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy, she actually said that, or she strongly implied that she felt quite torn between those two setups, and it is a tricky one because she's now got to go through the rest of this season coaching the Diamonds while knowing that she's signed for another team, and it's not quite the same even as signing for any team. It's actually their strong rival and the team that sort of picked them to the post for a tier 1 team. So that does make things interesting, shall we say, in terms of that player coach dynamic for the rest of the season. I will say that I think that actually Dani Hazell signing for Durham is a real coup for Durham, actually. And that I think that because if you are a current Diamonds player and you're wavering and you're not quite sure about which of those teams you want to play for, then your current coach, who's been very successful, who's clearly built really strong relationships with those players, moving to Durham is probably going to do more than anything else to convince you that you also want to make that move.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be a very interesting last part of the season for the Yorkshire people as well, because often companies on a wider perspective will put people on gardening leave for something like this. If someone leaves and says, well, I've signed to our big rival, they'll go, okay, well, then you need to just disappear and go, and we'll get someone else in on a temporary basis, and we'll look to the future. So what are Diamonds going to do to respond to this? Because I mean, if you're the Diamonds, the president of Yorkshire or whatever, you're going to be very disappointed with this, because Yorkshire were absolutely 100% definitely hoping that they would be able to keep Dani Hazell through, and that she'd be their tier 2 coach next year, and that she'd roll through into next year when they go back into tier 1. So there's going to be some disappointed people at Yorkshire about this, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating, and fascinating to see who then Yorkshire now get to sign as their coach of their team next year. Another player signing, Sid. So Nottinghamshire, if I can call them that, we'll talk about that in a minute, have signed their first player for next season. Kirstie Gordon has signed for them. Is this something we were expecting?
I mean, I think, ultimately we probably are expecting this, because she's obviously happy there. She's been with that franchise for quite a while now. She did play for some of her cricket for Notts when she first came down from Scotland. When she came down, she originally came down from Scotland to go to Loughborough University. That's how ultimately she ended up in the England team. She played a few matches for England a few years ago. But what a fantastic player she's been over the last couple of years, and she's someone that's really, she's really in control of her game now. She's a very important player, and she's become their captain, and she's also captained England A in their T20 matches over the winter. Interestingly, they sort of didn't quite promise her the captaincy going forwards, did they?
No, absolutely not. There was definitely hints in the press release, and we did actually interview her, or I interviewed her on Thursday after the Blaze Sunrisers game at Lord's, and actually specifically asked her, and she said, well, I hope so, but she's not 100%. I think that's really interesting, because she, as you say, she is obviously a really important player for them, has now led them to 2 successive Lottie Cup finals days, but hasn't been named as the captain. I wonder if Notts are slightly leaving their options open there, because as we've just said, we're currently in a situation where teams can only really sign their own existing players. At some point it's going to open up, and there's going to be well-known names who haven't signed, who are looking around for a new team. And if you can say to somebody, actually come and play for us and you'll be the captain, that could potentially be a very attractive offer, and a more attractive one than just saying come and play for us and we'll be able to pay you X, because often people are after those leadership opportunities, especially if they're at a particular point in their career. So yes, I do wonder whether Notts are potentially leaving their options open a little bit. Now, speaking of Kirstie Gordon, we did want to talk a little bit about something that she actually said in the exclusive interview that we did with her at Lord's, about basically saying that Notts are going to be known as the Blaze.
That's an interesting one. I mean, whether they'll be known as the Blaze, no, that's not quite what we think. We think they're going to be known as the Nottinghamshire Blaze.
Yes.
So there's been a little bit of talk about this, and Polly Starkey had some kind of quite forthright views in the Naughty Child podcast, always worth listening to. What did she have to say, Raf?
Yeah, so I think that Polly and some other people on social media as well are suggesting that they feel a little bit concerned about this because of they feel that the point of Project Darwin is to move the women's team's identities into being kind of folded back in with the men, and in order to achieve that natural alignment you have to have the same name. My response to that is fairly straightforward actually, that if they're the Notts Blaze, which is what we are pretty sure they're going to be, then it's just the same as the men being the Notts Outlaws in the Blast, for example. So as long as they've got that kind of shared Nottinghamshire identity, then their sort of nickname doesn't really matter. The other thing that I would say on this actually is that, well, first of all, I did actually ask Beth Barrett-Wild this ages ago when Project Darwin was kind of first revealed at the ECB offices, whenever that was, several months ago. And she said, well, it's going to be done on a team-by-team basis and it's up to the teams. So it's being done kind of individually, and each county will kind of take a view. But from my perspective, if the players are happy with that kind of tag as being the Blaze, and indeed, you know, in terms of the current kind of core of players who make up that Blaze team, they are from disparate backgrounds, disparate kind of counties, and therefore it's the Blaze label that they feel unites them. So if the players are kind of feeling comfortable and unified under that label and they're experiencing success as they have done the last couple of seasons, then from a county perspective you'd be a bit mad to change that and kind of force them to go under a different name that they didn't feel any attachment to. I mean, would you agree with that, Sid?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to be slightly careful about taking the players', views completely into account. You shouldn't just do it just because the players want it, because at the end of the day, the players aren't marketing people. They're not sales people. They're players. That's what they're paid to do. But if it's working for them, and as I say, if it's attached to the Notts name, then you've already got Notts fans, Notts members are already used to having Nottinghamshire and the Outlaws, because and they know that they're the same team. So there's no reason why Notts Outlaws and then Notts Blaze can't be kind of folded into that mix and still become part of that one club mentality. And really, that one club mentality is about what happens inside the club as much as what happens outside the club. And as long as they continue to pursue that vision within the club, and that the men within the club see the women as being included, whether they're called Notts Blaze or Notts Outlaws or Notts In-Laws or the Notts Maid Marians, I think somebody suggested. It doesn't matter. So I think it's fine going forwards. I'm okay with it.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see what happens with the other teams, I suppose. What happens with the other counties? We know that, for example, that Surrey have said that they're dropping the Stars moniker. They're just going to be Surrey men and Surrey women going forwards. I have to say, I think that is important. That if you're going to have Surrey women, you have to then start referring to the men as Surrey men, because otherwise what you're doing is very much othering women, aren't you? So that's going to be a very important thing that the counties hopefully get on board with, and that the players, the male players, hopefully get on board with as well. Sid, in other news this week, we were actually at the Oval, just speaking of Surrey, to watch the London Cup, weren't we? Which is this kind of historic sort of friendly, I say friendly in inverted commas, match that's taken place every year since 2015 between Surrey and Middlesex. A different kind of type of cricket, a different standard of cricket, because largely speaking, although we did see a couple of Stars players turning out for Surrey, and one Vipers player indeed, because Rihanna Southby was there. It's largely between two amateur teams, and I must say, kind of turning up to watch it and cover it, it did feel very much like a bit of a throwback. Had a bit of nostalgia actually, because the first ever London Cup was played at the Oval in 2015, and we were there. And I was looking up the report that we did. It was Nat Siver-Brunt turning out to play for her county, which was then Surrey, on a sort of a random weekday evening in May, I think it would have been, and just the fact that she did that, and that was a thing, and that it wasn't really remarkable, Very much, we turned up to the Oval and the press box was closed, everything like that. Just had that sort of feel of very much kind of back in the day when everything went under the radar a bit and it was quite difficult, but there was also something kind of quite nice and friendly about it. So Surrey did triumph in the end. By 6 wickets, I think it was, so a relatively straightforward win for them. What did you make of it all, Sid?
Well, it was fun to turn up and see that.
Yeah.
I think the big thing for me, that what was really instructive, was that as you mentioned, these are amateur teams. This is the Surrey amateur team, so you'd expect that none of the players, apart from possibly Rihanna Southby, would make up Surrey's first choice 11 next season. Probably, maybe Kate Kopak played for Middlesex, so she'll probably be playing for Essex next season, you'd think. But the other 10 players very likely not. Again, so what we're seeing is the next level down. What we're seeing is a glimpse of Tier 2. And I thought it was actually really interesting because I haven't watched a lot of cricket of that standard in the last couple of years. The only games I've watched have been Berkshire games, which as a fan I've been quite invested in, so I haven't seen them in quite the same light. So being able to watch a Tier 2 game in quite a detached way was really interesting. And what we need to kind of realise is that the standard, after 5 years of professionalism here, the standard in Tier 2 next year is not going to be anything like what we're likely to see out on the pitch here today. So the power of the batting is way down, the bowling is way down. We saw a bowler bowl several no balls that bounced twice, for example. We saw a lot of catches that we'd consider straightforward in the professional game. We saw them go down. We saw fielding errors. Everything about it was very much, to be totally fair, what you'd expect, given that these players have been amateurs, while these players out here have been professionals for, they're into their 5th season of full-time professionalism now, many of these. But it is going to be a much lower standard. And what that's really instructive about, I think, is what the situation is going to be when Yorkshire play in Tier 2 next year. Because if Yorkshire hold on to several of their kind of professional players, then it's going to be murder. They're going to absolutely, we're going to see some extraordinary results. And that's kind of an interesting challenge for the Yorkshire players. And it says something to the way that, you, as a player, how do you approach next year if you're going to be thinking, well, I've got a choice of staying at Yorkshire and going into Tier 2, and it'll do your numbers good. If you're thinking of doing that, you're a fast bowler could end up with 40 wickets, a batter could end up with 1,000 runs. Those numbers are going to be unprecedented, but they'll be unprecedented because it'll be like me having a boxing match with the 5-year-old that lives next door.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think that it's a real risk for Diamonds players if they opt to stay at Yorkshire next year and they're going to be playing all of their cricket for one season in Tier 2. And I think that if they're wondering about it, then they should look at the live stream of the London Cup, because it will be instructive to them. That's the standard that you're going to be playing at, and as you say, you'll have great numbers, but it may well hold back your development. Everybody else will be effectively a year ahead of you in terms of development by the time Yorkshire become a Tier 1 side a year later, a year after everybody else in 2026. So I think that they have got a real dilemma on their hands, and that's what watching the London Cup sort of illustrated for us, really. Okay, and finally this week, Sid, we've had an England squad announcement. Sorry, are we boring you?
Boring.
Yes, this is in relation to England's squad announcement for their ODI team to play New Zealand, starting in a couple of weeks' time. Essentially, and the reason that Sid is yawning is because this is exactly the same squad that we had for the matches against Pakistan. Now, they have formally added Sophia Dunkley, but she effectively was already with the squad for the last couple of games, so essentially it is exactly the same squad. On the Sophia Dunkley point, John Lewis did actually say she's earned the right to be back in the squad due to weight of runs and consistent performances. I guess that we would agree with that, Sid, having seen a couple of her batting performances over the last few weeks.
Yeah, full credit to Dunks. I mean, John Lewis told her to go back to regional cricket, score some runs. She went back to regional cricket, she scored some runs. She's done the job that was asked of her, and she deserves to be back in the mix on that basis. John Lewis has kept his word to her. Great stuff.
Absolutely. So that's kind of on the squad front. But John Lewis did obviously do a press conference yesterday, on Friday, sorry, when he talked about the squad, but I was also able to ask him a couple of other questions that I thought were kind of interesting. One is pertinent to the Charlotte Edwards Cup, which is obviously finals day is taking place next Saturday, and he actually confirmed that he wants as many England players to play in that as possible, which is interesting because there has been some criticism of late of the England players not playing enough regional cricket. So very interesting, and probably good news for the Vipers, Sid.
Yeah, well, I mean, we were here last year when the Vipers, their big internationals came back and they smashed it. So that was fantastic, and yeah, good news for them.
And one other thing that I was able to ask him about, and this actually relates to the interview that I did with Kirstie Gordon at Lord's on Thursday, was kind of the situation for Kirstie Gordon at the moment. Because I actually said to her, Scotland have qualified for the World Cup in Bangladesh in October. Are you at all tempted to go back and play for Scotland? It's a huge opportunity, and we know that she's a very patriotic, proud Scot. And she said, you know what, I'm really happy for the girls. I think it's a brilliant achievement for them. But where I see my career right now, I'm not going to be going back and playing for Scotland. So she didn't quite say, I think I could potentially get selected for England again. But reading between the lines, that's what this is all about, right? Because if she does go back and play for Scotland, then she completely closes the door on ever playing for England again, pretty much. Because she would then have to go through a re-qualification period that's quite lengthy. So I wanted to see what John Lewis thought about where she is in the pecking order in terms of that World Cup. And he was actually very honest, and he said, we're keeping an eye on her. It's great that she's bowling so well and having such a great season domestically, but ahead of her in the pecking order is Lindsay Smith. We've obviously got those three fantastic spinners for England at the moment, Eccleston, Dean and Glenn. It's difficult to see anybody dislodging them, but he did say if anyone is going to, at the moment it's going to be Lindsay Smith. So fair enough, he was honest, but she's there or thereabouts.
Yeah, it was an interesting kind of to talk to Kirstie about this, because as you say, she's definitely remains very Scottish at heart. But what she was saying, I felt kind of reading between the lines was, look, I've made my decisions. I came down to England, 7-8 years ago now. I opted for England. I got a few caps for England. There's still the possibility I might play again in the future. And this is my bed, and I'm going to make the most of it. And I'm not going to just kind of walk back into Scotland. Reading between the lines, she's saying, it's not really my place to just walk back in at this point. The girls there have achieved what they've achieved. I've made my choices, and I'm comfortable with them. I'm comfortable with where I am in my career, and so that I'm going to stay here. And I'm going to presumably she's going to be watching on telly. And if England play Scotland in that World Cup, as and when, then you can. Let me get interesting what's going on inside her head at that point, because I think that possibly secretly she'll want Scotland to win that one.
Interesting, or maybe not even so secretly. We'll be keeping an eye on social media for that, should she not end up in the England World Cup squad. Anyway, fantastic for her that she's having a great season, and best of luck to Blaze, of course, next weekend at finals day. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I think the next time that we're recording, we will know the 2024 Charlotte Edwards Cup winners, so that's going to be very exciting. We'll see you in a week's time. Bye for now.